Okay, Rebecca, feedback. We've talked a lot about this and we've both got strong views on it. I happen to believe that it's far less often given and received than people think, and it's wrapped up with criticism, praise, and advice, and it's not those things. So I could launch into a huge speech about it. I have done before. I'm not going to now. What are your broad views on feedback and why we're doing this?
Yeah, I think it's interesting what you've just said. I think people think they're giving feedback more regularly than what they are. But like you said, I think sometimes it comes across more as criticism or you should be doing this. So I think perhaps there's confusion around what feedback actually is and the purpose of feedback as well. So I think what we're aiming to do today is to clear up what feedback is, how to give it effectively, and what the purpose of it is as well, and how it's useful for both the giver and the receiver of feedback, hopefully.
Well, there's a huge amount you just put in there already. And I'm going to try personally to confine myself to what it says on the screen, because you're right. Feedback for both receiver and giver, benefit. A lot of people don't see it as a benefit. That's because it's so often a criticism. Let's not jump ahead. Let's look at the reason that I've put this definition on. And it's a credible source, Oxford Dictionary. Information about a person's performance of a task which is used as the basis for improvement. To me, the key word there is improvement. Is about giving information in the form of feedback that says, this will help you. Now, I just wonder if enough people actually start in a deliberate, conscious sense from that position.
I think perhaps sometimes there's a hidden agenda with feedback. Is I want to share my opinion of what I think you have done or not done, and you're going to hear it.
Yeah.
So the intention behind it is not always as sort of positive as it could be, I suppose, really, in that respect. So I think sometimes it's used as a way to manipulate a situation potentially as well. I know that's quite a strong word actually, but it can be.
Well, it's certainly, as will be made clear in the only 2 slides that will follow, it should be about benefiting the recipient. And very often I think it's all about the giver saying, right, here's a chance to tell you what I think about you. Let's move on, because we're doing this for the entertainment and delectation of the watchers, if there are 1 or 2 ever out there. So what have we got? And this is where I rely on technology to say, if I just click this, look at this. So I've condensed a massive amount of data that I've been working on here, and a much bigger set of slides to under your guidance. Thank you very much as ever. Thanks for the feedback that you gave me. No, that appears at least 3 times. And why is that there? It's helpful. It's not criticism at all. So I've cut this down to 5 fundamentals for giving feedback. And here we go. I'll read them out because we'll be podcasting this as well. Ensure your motives are helpful. We've kind of gone there already. Ensure your motives as a giver of feedback are helpful. What's your thoughts above what you said already?
Yeah, and I think that's really important. Before you give feedback, just check in with yourself. What is the intention of me giving this feedback? Is it just so I can get something off my chest, or is it genuinely to help the other person? So I think you can check in with yourself. What are my motives for doing this?
I think that would be an uncomfortable experience for a lot of feedbackers who might be caused, if they did it thoroughly, to say, actually, there isn't a good reason for doing this. This isn't feedback at all.
Maybe that's okay, but then we shouldn't be labeling it feedback. So I think perhaps there's also something around that. There's not necessarily anything wrong in giving your opinion about something, but please don't call it feedback if it's not feedback.
Oh, well done, because in saying from my perspective that feedback is not advice, criticism or praise, that doesn't exclude a role for advice, criticism and praise, which isn't called feedback. So I'm grateful for that. You're right, because it's too easy to say feedback isn't advice, criticism or praise. So don't call it that. The thing is, each of those things have a role.
They do. They are very important, but I think we have to be very transparent about what information we're sharing and the reasons for doing it.
Cool. Let's move on. Select time and place with care. Some of these things seem so self-evident and apparently common sense that you think, well, why even mention it? Well, you mention it because so often that isn't done well.
Yeah, and I think the thing around time, it should be timely. There's no point waiting until a week later and say, oh, by the way, when you did this in that meeting, you could have done it differently. The moment's lost. So I think selecting the time, it does need to be timely, not maybe in the exact moment, but it needs to be soon enough after it to have effect on it. And also the place as well is choosing somewhere private, especially if it's something that's sensitive or whatever. It shouldn't be done in terms of on the cuff, just as you've walked out down the corridor or something. It does need to be chosen quite carefully.
Because of who I am, I'm finding myself in my head disagreeing with you on some of that, not in a you are wrong sort of way, but saying, yes, you are right situationally. And I can think of times that would be entirely different. I can think of some people and some incidents where the time is right now. It's about saying, right, I saw you do that. That was great. I saw you handle that call and I was listening and I was impressed, because the time to say that is right then in that context. And also the place. Sometimes you're right. It's inappropriate to give feedback, particularly if it's feedback someone doesn't want to hear in front of others. If the feedback is good, and I think sometimes the implication is all feedback is somehow negative, all feedback is somehow challenging. Some feedback is, Rebecca, that was as good as I've seen anyone. And the time for that is right then, and the time and place is in front of others.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So maybe it's the context of the feedback then as well. Maybe that needs to be something to be considered, definitely. Yeah. Like you say, I think by giving it in front of others, then you're setting a good example. So there's definitely times for that, isn't there? Yeah.
And there are people who would welcome that, say, yeah, tell me how good I'm in front of these people. I love it. And then the other people say, oh, don't do this. They'll all have a go at me afterwards. So I feel so embarrassed. So what we're already saying is, great favourite word of Andrew coming up now, this is nuanced. Yeah. There is no definite always do this, always do that. It's a judgment call as to what's right already.
And perhaps this is, to some extent, knowing the person as well that you're giving the feedback to.
And how many people truly in the workplace know people as well as they think to whom they give feedback? Lots of places we could go, we're confining ourselves. Number 3 on the list of 5, focus on the value to the receiver. And that's all about saying, this is not about me, this is not for me, this is for the benefit and to enhance the performance of the person who's receiving.
Yes, and that's, like you say, it's really important. What is the value to the receiver? So is this going to help them tackle something more effectively in future? Is this going to enable them to improve their skill set? Does this actually, maybe, like you said, feedback can be really positive and about good things. So maybe it's to give them a boost of confidence, So what is it that the receiver is going to get from this?
And it's all about not just misusing the word empathy. It's always about positioning yourself genuinely and consciously and deliberately in the position of, how's this person going to take this? It's not about you. It's about, am I doing this for the benefit of the receiver? And if I am, convincingly, what is that? I think I'll be explicit. If you can't answer that question, I'm not sure you should do it at all.
No, and you need to be selective in what feedback you give as well. I don't know whether this is something that comes up later, actually, but
no, I haven't been that.
Yeah, I think there's often a lot of information that we can feed back to somebody, but sometimes that can be too much, and sometimes actually some of it is more for our own sanity than it is for the receiver. So, okay, I'm going to choose 2 points to feed back on because these are the ones that are going to have the most impact for the person receiving it.
And the answer, now I reflect on it, is yes, I do talk about just one thing at a time. And you're right. I say one thing, 2 things, 2 things, fine, but not 18 things. And it shouldn't be, while I've got you here and we don't get a chance to talk about this much, here's the other 16 things I want to give you at the same time. No, focus on the value, but also the ability of the receiver to process what you're working on, because this could be quite significant stuff. So I like this one. I've done a fair bit of running around and looking for stuff. Have a plan, support new behaviors. I think a lot of people who give feedback, I think, it's an opinion, feel that it's about one thing only. I'll tell you this and I'm done. I think particularly if for instance, you're in a leadership role of any sort, you're in a team role where you have a responsibility towards people's well-being, their contribution, it's not just about transactionally telling people things, saying things. It's about that being in the context of a supportive, active role to help that person implement new behaviours.
I like this one, actually. I hadn't thought about this before, but yes, so it's all right giving somebody feedback, but maybe sitting with them and helping them plan a way of what can they do with that feedback and how do they go about using it. That's a really good point. Yeah, rather than just giving them the information, is there a way that you can support them further down the line as well?
So I've told you what I think. Cheerio, good luck.
Yeah. Yeah. Go off and do it, Aaron.
I shouldn't be jocular because this is powerful, important stuff. But you're right, that had resonance with me, and I thought that is so true. It isn't. You can do the giving of it well. You can be skilled and do all the good stuff. If you just left a person high and dry and left to their own devices, that might not be enough. You might need to help them further. So I liked this. I like concise stuff. The power is in the positive. It's not a reason never to give feedback which might be perceived as being negative. I actually do think that there's probably more value, and I'm being a little bit uncertain here, there's probably more value in telling people what they're doing well to do more of than venturing into the you need to do this better country. That's not to say that you don't have to venture into the I saw that happen, it mustn't happen again type stuff. Sure, that has to happen. I just feel, I've got very little reason to feel this way, that there's probably greater value in the positive feedback that grows than attacking the negative stuff, although that's not a reason not to attack the negative stuff. So tying myself in a bit of a knot there, but I do like the words, the powers in the positive. I'm not entirely sure what it means.
Yeah, I get where you're coming from, but interestingly, I sort of disagree with this on a personal point, because interestingly, when I deliver any workshops or training or whatever, the first thing I will always look out for is any sort of criticism and on the negative stuff, because and I suppose that maybe that's my mindset and attitude toward it, and maybe you're right, maybe it's good to see what I'm doing well so I can keep doing that. But for me, if I'm already doing that, where's my growth in that? What I'm looking for is actually where are the elements that I can improve on, and I can only improve on the things that I'm not so good at. I'm not saying that it should, you can still deliver some negative feedback in a positive way. So rather than saying, well, you're rubbish, you can still say you could do this bit better.
Again, how long have we got? I like it when we disagree, because we've been too cozy sometimes in these conversations, and we're getting a bit more robust with each other. And we're not really disagreeing, because I know what you mean. I've spent 40 years getting feedback from people, so-called, which is sometimes a chance for them to cash in their stamps and say, didn't want to be here at all, it was rubbish. Okay, thanks very much. So they're the ones you remember on the drive home. You've got the 16 bits of paper, you've looked at them, the client's gone off and they've thought, oh dear, I know, like me, they're going to look at the 2, not the 14. And all right, a chance here to say, aren't we unusual? Because we can go into a room of people we've never met before, and we're one of the few professions, if we call it that, in terms of delivering learning, where people who've never met you before get a chance on the first day to, in writing, tell you what they think about how well you do the job. Well, that doesn't happen very often. So putting all that to one side and getting people to feel sorry for us, however powerful the positive might be, is the negative we remember most and has the most resonance.
Yeah, but like I said, I think it's important that you can deliver the negative message in a positive way.
Absolutely. And that also is a skill. And this is not easy to do, because you're right. Telling people something they don't want to hear, and I'm hiding away from the word negative, telling people something they don't want to hear in a way which is supportive and a benefit to them is a skill. And it's a skill I think is beyond a lot of people who think they're good at this.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm moving on. I'm getting better at this revealing technique for people who are seeing it. 7 guidelines for giving feedback. Got to call it something. So a list of 7 things about giving feedback that really extends the last list. Number 1 on this, focus on what specifically you have seen and how you felt. This is fundamental number 1 in many ways, isn't it? Because feedback should be not about judgments, not be about anything wider than what was observed specifically and how you felt about that.
Yes, and I think that's it, isn't it? We can sometimes people can stray into judgments and assumptions, possibly based on personalities rather than actually on behaviours that they've seen. So I think that's actually really important. What did you actually see rather than what did you assume that happened?
And if you confine yourself as the feedbacker to what you personally saw and how you personally felt, that's harder to challenge.
Yes.
Because I can say, Rebecca, you didn't see that. You didn't feel that. Hey, hold on a minute. I used these two to look at you and I felt this. And you're telling me I didn't do that? So if we stick to that, we don't stray into that. And by the way, you're always like this. I saw you do it last week, and that's typical of you. No, don't do any of that. Stick to what you saw. Stick to how you felt.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's no more to say, is there? So concise and clear. This is very often a charged conversation. It's a difficult conversation. It might have implications of all sorts, or be a contributory factor to those. So being concise and clear, and again, the avoiding judgments takes us into where we go, but the concise and clear thing should help because it keeps things concise and clear. They don't get muddled with other things. It's focused on the important stuff to the exclusion of the waffly stuff.
Yeah, and I think then it's hard to misinterpret things. If you're very clear and specific or concise about what you're saying, it's much less likely to be interpreted. If you're sort of going around the houses, as it were, then it's easier for people to sort of misunderstand what's been said or what the actual point is. So yeah, be clear, be concise, and like we've just been saying, really avoiding those personal judgments, isn't it?
It's not about personality, it's not about history, no. It's only about transactionally what was seen, what was felt. This is tough, but it's also a skill that's well worth developing. I've always felt the ability to give feedback and to receive it constructively and skillfully and not destructively is a differentiating skill right across the board, whether you're a manager and leader of 5,500 or no one at all. The ability to be someone who unusually can say, this you did really well, because let's not forget, it's too easy to get drawn into a feedback equals negative. It isn't the case. Yeah. An awful lot more positive feedback can and should be given in the workplace, and this applies irrespective of its nature. So, number 3 on the list of 7, anticipate and manage reactions. Now, humans, because typically, to generalize, don't get a lot of feedback, don't always have that skill set to say, okay, feedback, how do I respond to this? Oh yeah, in this very positive and calm manner. It doesn't always happen. So the giver of feedback, and again, this is perhaps where concise and clear helps, for instance, the giver of feedback may have to deal with some reactions, which could be amazingly positive or rather negative, thank you very much, because perception's reality. You may be doing all the things you say needs to be done well, Rebecca, phrasing your negative feedback in a very positive, helpful, supportive way, but all the other person sees is criticism. And if that is the case, you might get a different reaction and an unhelpful reaction in your view back than you thought.
Yeah, and I guess this is quite a difficult one, but this is where it is important to know the person that you're giving the feedback to wherever possible, I think. If you know that what you're giving is potentially going to be seen in a negative way, regardless of whether you mean it in a negative way or not, if there's potentially something there that might be a bit uncomfortable, recognizing that and almost maybe pre-framing it, in terms of when you, again, just reiterating why you're giving the feedback is important. And like you said, I think sometimes, unfortunately, can I just give you some feedback on that? Yeah. It's a loaded sentence for some people, isn't it? And I think some people are going to be quite worried about it or anxious. So yes, I think maybe pre-framing it, knowing the person that you're giving the feedback to can be helpful.
You still get surprises.
Oh yeah.
And I think one of the things that I read in preparation for this was about emotional connection. I've not put it up there as a limit to what we can, but very often feedback causes an emotional response. It might not be evident, but it's still felt. And I think anticipating and managing reactions could also be about anticipating, not taken by surprise by as many emotional reactions as you might get. And I won't lose this opportunity to attack the sandwich with a word that usually comes before it in relation to feedback. Oh, you tell them something nice, then you tell them what you really mean to, then you tell them something nice again, forget it. All they remember is the bit in the middle. So forget that rubbish. Have the wherewithal to get directly to what you're there to give feedback upon. No sandwich, no bread, just the meat in the middle. So here we go. I think this is good. I'm enjoying this. Listen attentively. That's an interesting one. I thought carefully about that. And when I kept seeing the references to this in sources I thought were credible, I thought listening is not about listening, but it is, because if you're giving feedback, you're getting reaction, you're getting response, you're getting interaction. And you may be wrong. Maybe you've set out to say, no, hang on, I want to have a conversation about this because I saw you trying really hard. I've seen you do it better than you did. And I want you to know, I don't think it went as well as it perhaps it should have done. Here I am drawing on the negative. I could have phrased that positively. And then you think, if you're listening attentively, you're asking questions, is that how you saw it? Have I got it right? Am I wrong somehow? Maybe you were. Maybe it's an opportunity for the person to say, Andrew, that's not what I saw at all. What you didn't see or what you didn't understand. And maybe to get, as you said before, the context, which might be different to what we thought it was, through listening and interacting, we could think to ourselves, well, actually, the feedback I was about to give is inappropriate.
Yeah, I think that's a really good one, isn't it? Asking questions and checking in with how it's landed with a person as well, you know, because depending on the context, it might be inappropriate to continue. If somebody's had quite a strong emotional reaction to something,
Sure.
They aren't going to be listening or able to listen or able to process anything else you give them. And you may actually have to call it a day at that point. So I think it is really important. So listening attentively, and also observing body language is part of that, isn't it? I think, you know, has the body language changed as a result of what you've just told them?
Yeah, and that's a two-way thing, because our own body language is also out there as well. We're on the inside thinking we know what's being projected, but we're not seeing it. So sometimes if we've got the face that says, so you do think I'm right, don't you? Then that doesn't help. So having that calm face helps. The more we're covering here, the more I'm thinking, hey, this is tough. It doesn't have to be so tough it's never done. These are skills which can be learned, and feedback is at different levels. Some feedback is low level. Some feedback is pretty close to saying, well done, that's it. Other feedback is about saying, no, get this right, or it could cost you your job. So there's different levels of this, and we shouldn't be deterred by maybe us talking up the far end of the difficulty aspect, the emotional stuff. Not everything involves that. A lot of feedback should just be about saying, I saw you do something really well there. That was impressive.
Yeah. And maybe that's something that we need to practice on a more regular basis to get used to giving feedback.
Oh, don't be just. I got a fantastic experience on that. It's the most popular plug item on my YouTube channel. Yeah, anyway, get back to this. So we mentioned this before, didn't we? Maybe I put this up in a duplicating way. Have a plan, support new behavior. So I must have done it to reinforce the significance of this. So all of what we've talked about is best helped and made better by not being alone in using the lessons from the feedback, to have the feedbacker saying, and I'm here to help. I'm not just here to tell you this stuff. I've given you potentially some tricky things to work on, and I want to help you with that. I wonder how often that happens.
I think also you can look at this from the other point of view here with the giving feedback. Have a plan for giving feedback. How do you intend to do it? You know, do you need to pre-frame it and give some context to it? So having a plan in how you're going to give the feedback can often mean that you give it in a much more effective and positive way as well, which then enables you to support new behaviours in the person receiving it.
I think that's right. It shouldn't just be a spontaneous thing. It shouldn't just be whoa, I wish I hadn't chosen this time, this place, or this unpreparedness to say this, look what it's got me into. If you can anticipate as many of those things which might go wrong as possible and not let them go wrong, and wrong could just mean I want it to go better. You're right. It's about being prepared, being ready to do this difficult thing. So 2 to go. Work on one issue at a time. We have mentioned that before, but it's worth reinforcing. It's too easy to see this as an opportunity to go through a list of things. No, it should be about, when I saw you do this, you mentioned 2, I'll buy 2, but not 3, 4, 5, or 6 or 7. If there's a couple of related things or there's a connectedness, yes, by all means. Don't lose the focus, I suppose, is the key thing.
Yes, because I think sometimes it can lose its impact if you give a whole list of things, because it's not going to sit well. It's actually not going to have the desired effect of providing opportunity for the person to take it on constructively. They're just going to think, well, they're going to close off, aren't they? So I think 1 or 2 things maximum.
Yeah, absolutely. People zone out, or they just feel beaten up, or overhelped. Hey, so easy to slip into feedback equals negative. Maybe think, too much good stuff. What's the best thing in all this? So finally, and I think this was a good one to finish on, to be honest, observe personal limits, work on behavior that can be changed. And that's the responsibility of the feedback giver to say, I'm going to be talking to X, Y, or Z person about this. It's going to be a tricky conversation, as you said, the plan. One of the things within having a plan should be, I should only seek from them what they can deliver to themselves. I shouldn't ask more of them than they're capable of delivering. I should only work on behavior that can be changed.
Yes, because there's some things that's not, somebody might not have control over, depending on their work context or other personal attributes and things. So sometimes things can't be changed, to actually focus on the things that the person can do something about, because that's a much more empowering situation to be in, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And a lot of these things fit together. If you're going to support new behaviors, they should be on behavior that can be changed. So here we are sitting down working all these things. And, I didn't realize, you're quite right. All of that's beyond you, isn't it? Or it's not just a work role thing. It could be people's capabilities and people's opportunity. It could just be about the skill set. I've got a limit to what I'm capable of. It's hard for me to convince myself of that sometimes. Everyone has. And to ask more of someone than they can deliver is unreasonable and unfair.
Yeah, very much so. And again, that's about knowing the person, isn't it, on here as well?
I think that's a theme, isn't it? How well do we know this person that we're giving a message to? It is it as well as I think, and did it turn out to bring any surprises my way? So any round off thoughts, any general reflections?
Feedback is incredibly useful, but I think we have to be honest with ourselves about the reason why we're giving feedback. And we have to just maybe have a little mental checklist before we give feedback. Have we prepared for this? If we feel that there's preparation needed, like you say, sometimes in the moment you just do it. And how well do I know this person?
Well, I'm not going to say any of that twice. And I was thinking, crikey, what are you going to leave me? Maybe it's nothing at all. If it was nothing at all, I'd say nothing. I think for me, it's about feedback being, as often, sometimes depending on circumstances, more often than not, positive, and not to confuse feedback with something negative, and certainly not with criticism. And just keep doing it. The more you do of it, the better you get at it.
Yeah.
Thank you as ever, and thank you previously for the feedback you gave me to make this into a better shape. Thank you.
Thank you.